Lydia, thanks so much for spending a few minutes talking about your new book, Finding God in My Loneliness, just out from Crossway. Tell us a little bit about who you wrote the book for. It's called Finding God in My Loneliness. It's not just your own story, but you've written it for...
I wrote it for all the women I've talked to over the last 3 decades, myself included in that. Women are lonely. People are lonely. It's the human condition, I think, and often we don't identify that that's what's going on with us. Sometimes there can be this sort of nebulous feeling inside that something's missing, and it's hard to put our finger on the fact that it's loneliness. It's not just single people, people who are alone. It's everybody. So that's who I hope will pick up this book and find out who God is for them in the midst of those feelings of loneliness.
What is it about loneliness, do you think, that makes us want to avoid even talking about the topic? Because you don't hear a lot of speakers at conferences speaking on loneliness. You probably have not heard many sermons about the topic of loneliness. You're right that a lot of us do experience loneliness, but what is it about loneliness in particular that makes us want to not even talk about it?
Well, I think people can feel ashamed of that feeling. They can question why they feel that way. People with very clearly blessed lives will say, why I have no reason to be lonely, and there's no excuse for me to be lonely. So they try to pretend that they're not, or just keep busy to avoid those feelings. I think there's a sense of guilt about feeling lonely. We are a privileged society, and we know we are. So I think that's part of why it's not talked about more often. I think also people just don't identify that that's what's going on with them.
You know, we're talking about loneliness, but we haven't really defined it yet. I imagine if you just walked up to somebody on the street and said, what do you mean by loneliness, or what does loneliness mean to you? They would say, being alone. Is that
right.
the definition of loneliness?
I think that's one of the things I point out in the book, is that there's a difference between aloneness and loneliness. You know, you can have some of the loneliest people are surrounded by others. And there are people who spend a lot of isolated time, and yet they're not lonely. So there's a difference there. I think it's this feeling inside of emptiness or of feeling cut off. And it's almost this vague, undefinable something. And that's another reason I think it's not talked about, is that it's hard to put our finger on exactly what it is. What are we describing here? But this is where I think that God comes into play. I think He created us with that sort of void in our hearts. When he put Adam and Eve in the garden, and He said that it was not good that the man should be alone, so He created a wife for him. But He was created. God created Adam with that need, with that void. So it wasn't just a result of the fall, the loneliness. It was how He was created. And so I think that God did that so that we would yearn for Him and find our all in Him. So I don't think Eve was given, she was not given as a remedy for this deep, deep sense of loneliness. I think she is God's provision, God's design for human beings, but it's really just a foretaste. He is the answer to that. So if we didn't have that feeling of loneliness, we would not search for God in the way we do. We would not know our need of Him.
So we know Jesus was sinless. What do you think about Jesus' relationship to loneliness? Did He experience loneliness? If He was completely content in His relationship with the Father, would He experience loneliness?
I think as a human being, He did. I think that's why sometimes He would go off alone to be with His Father. God designed us to be in fellowship with one another. So Jesus, we think about how He was rejected by people. He was abused by them, misunderstood, and loneliness springs from all those things. So He experienced them. So as a man, surely He did, which is why, and it says He's able to sympathize with all our weaknesses. He lived what we live, so He understands, He knows, and I do believe He lived that. But what did He do when He felt that? And when He experienced it, He went off alone to be with His Father. And that's where He turned to find His solace first and foremost.
Introduction to your book starts off with a very evocative word picture of you thinking about Christmas from various different angles and having to do with singlehood and with married life. Maybe you could tell that story.
It was not a time of year where so many people experience loneliness, the holidays. And it was a few years ago, and a friend of mine was talking about going home and what she was going to do that evening with her family, and they were going to decorate the Christmas tree, and she was making a nice meal, and I could just picture in my mind the scene. It was this happy family gathered around a roaring fire, and suddenly in that moment, I decided I didn't want to get a Christmas tree that year, and it's a tradition I've always loved. But the thought of going home and doing that by myself, after thinking about that happy family scene, it just ruined it for me. So that was the first year I decided not to get a Christmas tree. But it was a couple years later, I was talking to a friend and telling her that story. And she said, "Oh, let me tell you how that goes." And she said, "This is every year. I get all ready, and I make the cookies and the hot chocolate and get all the ornaments out, and I call my family to come in, and within 10 minutes, one has gotten a cell phone call and the other is distracted another way, and off they go, and I end up decorating the tree alone every year." And it really hit me then, that it's not whether we're alone or with a family that makes that kind of tradition joyful. So we get the illusion sometimes that these happy family scenes are the remedy for loneliness. So I think single people look in the window of these scenes and think, this is what I'm missing. And married people are living those scenes and still feeling lonely and saying, what am I missing? So it's that kind of image, though. It's just like on Facebook when we see all the happy beach vacations and the family photos, everyone puts their best face forward, and we project what we want for ourselves, and we project what we want others to view our lives as. And so that enhances the loneliness of others who look at that and think people think that is their life, what they're seeing there. And in reality, it is nobody's life. Nobody is their Facebook page.
I was thinking this morning about your book, Finding God in My Loneliness, and thinking about, say, the time of Jonathan Edwards, a single woman going home from work, and the silence of the house in that era. So you can't put on a record player, can't turn on the TV, can't fire up the computer. If there's nobody there, there's really no human voice. But we live in such a different culture now, 21st century, where if someone is alone, they could fill up all their discretionary time with voices, whether it's digital voices or watching somebody on TV. How has contemporary culture, technology changed the experience of loneliness? Has it helped solve the problem, or has it made it worse?
It's enhanced our loneliness in the first place, because today we have so many choices like never before. If something in our life seems to be missing, we can easily make changes to our lives. We can change jobs, towns, churches, families even, and thinking that's going to solve our problem. So even within unsinful parameters, within biblical parameters, we feel free to make these changes. Sometimes we're really on a quest for solving that inner problem, but it doesn't work. And yet we actually end up enhancing loneliness because we move from community to community or church to church or friendship to friendship in the hopes that that's going to be the answer. And then we end up never committing and never building and doing life with the same people in the same place over a long period of time. So that's enhanced loneliness today. People used to be in their career for, 30 or 40 years, and today they say, I just read the other day that people coming out of college tend to stay in jobs maybe a year and 8 months on average, and they change under 2 years repeatedly for several years. And that's hard to build. It's fragmenting. And when people go home from work alone today, they can just check out. They can turn on the television, turn on the computer. Given the abundance of wealth of our country, we usually have very well-stocked refrigerators. And so you think people get home, they're alone, they want to escape those feelings. There are a million ways to do it, and they snack their way through the evening with the television on or the computer on, and it's sad because they're not solving anything. They're just killing time until they can get up and start the cycle again the next day, and then keep busy all day. And I think part of what's enhancing that evening angst for people who are alone is that they're not as busy. And that scares them. They have to think, they have to face their thoughts and their feelings. But this is really an opportunity, because it's in those alone hours that we can decide what we're going to do with that. We can escape, or we can reach out to the Lord, because even when no one else is there, He is there. And maybe that's when we're going to find Him the closest, is when we are alone and we just face it with Him, go to Him, instead of escaping it. Escaping is easier, it's more immediate, and the payoff is right there, but it doesn't last. So it's fighting through those dark hours, clinging to the Lord, turning to Him. It's amazing, I think. He longs to meet us in our loneliness, and He will come to us in those hours if we will turn there.
So final question, and knowing that you can't give a complete answer because you've written the book for a more complete answer, but if somebody were to come to you and to say, Lydia, I'm surrounded by people all the time, or not, but I can't shake this perpetual sense of loneliness, of discontentment, of something not being right, of not fitting in, of not belonging to a community, how would you begin to counsel them, again, knowing that you give a fuller answer in the book?
I would say that they're probably looking in the wrong places. We have wrong expectations of our relationships, of our own lives, of ourselves. And the answer comes from looking in one place. The Lord is the answer to our loneliness. And I know that seems abstract to some people. They want practical, concrete solutions. And we think we're going to find that in our lives and in relationships around us. But if we look there, and they are God's provision for us, but they're not an end in themselves for that purpose. They point beyond themselves to God. That is where we need to go. He is the remedy. He wants to be that. He is that. And that's where we will find it.